Thanks so much for joining us today. We're going to get started in a minute. I just wanted to orient everyone to the webinar and the WebEx system that we use. For those of you that have joined us before, you're familiar with this, but for those of you that haven't, I just wanted to give you a little orientation. Over to the right, there's a chat box. Please chat and send to all panelists any chat throughout the webinar today. Dr. Anil Chacko is going to have a few parts in the beginning where he's going to ask you to chat and answer, so you can use that box. You can also chat in questions for Dr. Chacko and send to all panelists, and he will get to them at the end of the webinar if time permits. There's also one polling question in the beginning, and so the poll will pop up, and we'd like for you to answer it, and you can just answer by clicking one of the options. Our webinar today is about the core components of effective treatment for childhood disruptive behavior problems, or also referred to as DBDs. We're so fortunate to have Dr. Anil Chacko present for us today. He's been working on the issue of childhood disruptive behavior problems for about 2 decades, and I've had the opportunity and fortune to work with him in many different ways. So he's amazing, and he's has a lot of knowledge and expertise to share with us today, so I'm glad that everyone's participating. Dr. Chacko is the Assistant Professor in the Department of Psychology at Queens College, and thank you so much for being here, Dr. Anil Chacko, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Hi, everybody. Let me just go on to the next slide. As Kara mentioned, I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Psychology at Queens College, CUNY, and a considerable amount of my work has been focused on either providing clinical services to families with kids with DVDs, supervising clinicians, or doing research in this area. So we have quite a bit to cover in an hour. So my hope is that the webinar provides a good overview of the treatment of DVDs in children. We're going to talk about 2 main components. Really, the treatment of disruptive behavior disorders, focusing on a broad framework for both clinicians and families to consider when thinking about long-term and short-term goals in the context of treatment for this problem area. We'll be talking a bit about common processes and methods and common content. And at the very end, our hope is to briefly discuss some common modifications for considering developmental level, comorbid ADHD, and some parental issues. And our hope is at the very end, if we have a few minutes left, to be able to have an option for Q&A. Okay. So as Kara mentioned, there should be a polling question coming in that asks, what would you say are the main factors related to the development and persistence of disruptive behavior disorders? So if you look on your right side, you have just a few seconds or so. If you can answer that question, that would be great. Okay. So, Kara, do you want to close that poll? I think that's probably enough time. Okay, and let's see what we have here in terms of an answer. Is there an answer here, Kara? Sorry.
The results are gonna pop up in probably about 1 second.
1 second? Okay.
Yeah, it takes a few seconds sometimes to organize all the results. Here we go.
Okay, so about 70% of you said all of the above, and as you probably know, whenever there's an option for all of the above, it's usually the right answer. So what we know is that all of these factors influence the development of DBDs, family genetics, environment, family systems, personality. We know that these factors work independently, additively, meaning 1 + 1 = 2, plus also interactively. So some factors interact with other factors at certain critical periods in a child's development and influences the persistence of disruptive behavior disorders. In fact, there's a growing evidence that there is likely not only genetic but epigenetic effects, so the impact on the environment turning on and off certain genes that are related to children's psychopathology in general during pregnancy. So the development and persistence of DBDs is complicated and multifactorial. So with this information, it may seem that we're in a losing battle. How can we address what you're born with, what happened in the past, with what's going on currently, in both sort of a macro level, like community level factors, and also micro level, like personality level factors? And the answer really is that you can't do everything. Our best research suggests that while all these factors are important, we can likely make the biggest impact by addressing the factors that are most proximal and malleable to the occurrence of disruptive behavior disorders. And so that's going to be the real focus for today. So I acknowledge that all of these factors are important. They play an important role throughout a person's life, but we're going to really focus on what we can change, or what we can try to change, and what's most proximally involved in the development of DBDs and persistence of DBDs. So some important points about this webinar. As I mentioned before, we have about 60 minutes, so we're going to really be selective in terms of the type of information that I'm going to be talking about. We're going to focus on families and parent-based interventions, and then the question is, why should we do that? So there are at least a couple. One is families are the most consistent and perhaps can be the most supportive environment a child has for their entire life. So families matter both in the short and long term. While there are other types of interventions like social emotional training, problem solving for youth, social attributional training, all of these interventions that I just mentioned often almost always utilize some aspect of the parenting interventions we're going to be discussing herein. So that's another reason why we're going to focus on this particular content. And number three, this type of intervention, parenting-based interventions or family-based interventions, is the most well-studied intervention for the treatment of disruptive behavior disorders. And some have argued the most well-studied psychosocial intervention for any mental health disorder in childhood. So there is a real robust evidence base for this particular set of content, and so this is another reason why we're focusing on it today during this brief 1-hour webinar. It's important to note that the intervention that we're going to be talking about today have the most evidence for young children through school-age kids. This doesn't mean the principles underlying the intervention are not relevant for adolescents, but there needs to be some modification. We're going to quickly address some developmental issues later in the presentation. And lastly, disruptive behavior disorders, or DBDs, can occur as a function of other issues, for example, trauma. But even in these cases, this type of family work can be helpful. So importantly, a solid assessment is needed to determine what may be contributing to the DBD in order to provide the best treatment options. The assumption here in this webinar is that you've conducted a thorough assessment and ruled out other possible reasons for DBDs in youth. Okay. So what I'd like for you to do is a little exercise. So you can please write in your responses under the chat option. That should be on your screen on the right side. For the sake of time, you only have about 15 seconds or so to answer this particular part. So what I'd like for you to do is to provide characteristics of the best supervisor or teacher you ever had. So I'm going to give you about 15 seconds. Don't overthink this. Just write in what comes to mind. Write down or write in the characteristics of the best supervisor or teacher you ever had. So go ahead and do that. Okay, anyone else? So we have folks saying supportive, constructive, intelligent, understanding, open, caring, interested, authentic. Okay, great. Okay, now how about we, again, take about 15 seconds, just you can write in, just identify 3 characteristics of the worst supervisor you've ever had or teacher. Well, we're getting a lot more responses. Okay, so everybody has to slow down on this. Okay, so we have a lot of responses around the worst supervisor or teacher. So authoritative, condescending, non-interactive, narcissistic. I can't keep up with all this. Punitive, rigid, loud. Okay, great. So loud, rigid. Okay, great. So now what I'd like for you to do is same thing as before. Just write in the impact that the worst supervisor or teacher had on the environment or classroom and on the employees or students. And again, don't overthink, think this. Just think about the impact of this particular person on the climate and the people who were in the environment. All right, so we're getting a lot of answers here from anger, anxiety, fear, lack of trust, shutdown in learning, inattention, depression, hostile environment, don't want to come to work. Okay, so we're going to stop there, and I'm going to ask you to do the same thing, but just provide, again, don't overthink it, just the impact of a good supervisor or teacher on both the context or climate and the people in it. So if you can provide a little bit of info on that, that would be great. So about 10 seconds or so. All right, so we're getting things like confidence, feeling healthy, productive, wanting to learn, to improve, enthusiasm, boosting confidence, good morale, positive environment, productive, you feel like going above and beyond. All right, great. All right, so we're going to stop right there. And so clearly, as you can see, that this is probably an exercise that people have done before, but the purpose of this is to get a sense of the impact of an individual person on the culture, the climate, the morale, the productivity of people. Now, this next slide is actually some of the answers in my work with families. These are some of the answers that parents and older children have provided, and they correspond pretty well with what was written in this chat-in. So the characteristics of a bad supervisor or teacher: people that are unavailable and uninterested, rigid, unclear, unfair, doesn't recognize effort, etc. And some of the characteristics that parents and older children, and I say older children because younger children have a difficult time trying to complete this exercise, but older children and parents often say the characteristics of a good supervisor or teacher, has open door policy, respectful, flexible, recognizes efforts, is consistent, and provides feedback. So those are all very, very important things. And so this has a clear impact in terms of outcomes, and many of you mentioned this. So these are the answers to the same exercise when I've done it with parents and older kids. Again, some of you had the same kinds of answers. So the impact of one particular person on an environment, meaning the context or sort of climate of an environment and the people in it, can be pretty dramatic. So one person can have a large impact, and it has to do with decreasing motivation, feeling less connected. People are unwilling to make extra efforts. They feel, as you guys mentioned, some people feel anxious or angry or unsettled or not at peace. And likewise, there's a strong impact of having a good supervisor or teacher. So you look forward to going to work. You're connected. You feel secure. You feel trusted and safe. And so these are really important outcomes. So what's the purpose of this particular exercise? So For parents and clinicians, it's important to keep the big picture in mind. This is not just about changing some things just to get your kids to behave better. Sure, that's part of it, but it's a change in the interactions among people that set the stage for long-lasting, secure relationships. So this kind of environment in where kids and families will thrive and that kids will be more motivated to be contributors to a healthy family. In this kind of exercise, parents and older children get an opportunity to reflect upon their own behavior and the family. It allows people to identify early on what kind of family climate they have and how they can start to consider what has to happen in their families. It's also important here to recognize that sometimes someone has to be willing to take a lead in making change. We always tell parents that it's not your fault, but it's your responsibility. So in line with that, this exercise reminds us that you can get a little by giving a little, that we don't have control over other people's behavior, but through our own behavior, we can motivate change in others. No matter what, it's going to take some effort. And importantly for clinicians, and I think this is important as we sort of think about this framework for common content in particular, there are many, many different kinds of activities that will help set the stage for transforming the family climate and children's behavior. What we're going to be talking about in terms of core content today are a set of evidence-based techniques that influence short-term behaviors with the ultimate goal of trying to improve the climate of the family. The set of content we're going to discuss are not the only way, and they're not exhaustive, so this is really important to keep in mind. And I've used this exercise early in treatment to provide a framework for the work that I do with families and help them engage in an active discussion about the goals of treatment. Okay, so now on to sort of common processes and methods. So first we're going to talk about a common set of processes and methods. This is all used as part of each and every session when you discuss common content. So we're going to be talking about assessment, Socratic Style, agenda setting, how we learn through discussion, modeling, role-playing, and assigning and reviewing homework. Okay, so first, ongoing assessment. So importantly, evidence-based does not equal guaranteed success. So this is an evidence-based set of techniques, methods, and processes, but it doesn't guarantee that if you use them, there's going to be positive outcomes. So in order to know whether something is working, you have to track it. So as the adage goes, if it matters, track it. This should be done in a collaborative way, selecting the best measures, however imperfect or incomplete, that addresses the types of issues that a family and child is struggling while balancing burden with information acquired. So importantly, as a shared collaborative process, tracking and scores should be no secret to anyone. You want the families to know and actively engage in this aspect of treatment. And I find it important to do weekly assessments in order to understand and monitor treatment progress. It's going to be important to either utilize a standardized psychometrically validated measure, and we're highlighting here the Iowa Connors scale, but there are plenty of others, or more personalized measures such as the top problems, and again, to do so in a collaborative manner. I'm going to talk about top problems in the next slide. So here's the Iowa Connors. It's a 10-item measure that has 2 subscales. It has been used extensively in research and in clinical work for kids with disruptive behavior disorders. The first 5 focus on inattention and overactivity, which are ADHD symptoms. So you can see here, these first 5 here are just ADHD symptoms. The second subscale is the OD subscale, or the Oppositional Defiant subscale. You can pick just the OD scale. It just has 5 items, again, right here, these 5 right here, and they are summed. I like using both the IO and OD subscales because of the common comorbidity between ADHD symptoms and ODD. And I've used this with preschoolers up through older school-age children and younger adolescents. Interestingly, what I have done is to see the extent to which intervention may improve items on the OD subscale and the extent to which ADHD types of symptoms are persisting and perhaps even interfering with treatment of oppositional problems. So for me, given the comorbidity between ADHD and oppositional and DBD kinds of problems, it's often useful to see, to track both to see if one is getting better, if 2 are getting better, if one is perhaps getting better, but treatment progress is being minimized because of the effect of, say, something like ADHD. Also, we've used the Iowa Connors here, again, as an example. Don't think that a measure should only focus on child disruptive behavior disorders, although this is the reason why many parents come to treatment. You may also focus on other outcomes like social skills, family cohesion, etc. If you're interested in learning more about any other measures that I have used or have been used in the research literature for families of kids with DBDs that you can potentially use in terms of your own clinic or practice, just absolutely let me know and shoot me an email. I'll be happy to share information with you. In terms of ongoing assessment and more idiographic measures, the top problems. So the top problems is an idiographic measure that I found quite useful for the purpose of treatment monitoring. It's very flexible and simple to use and personalized to each family. Essentially, we just ask parents to list the problems, rate them along severity, and focus on the top 2 to 3 behaviors. Importantly, these behaviors should be objective so they can be tracked and possible to treat in your therapy context. Herein, you can see that a parent selects 3 behaviors, each of which cause some problems for the child, like fighting with their siblings, completing homework, being outside without parents knowing. These behaviors are objective and can be treated, and we ask parents to rate the top problems at the beginning of every session, and this forms the basis for discussion and treatment decisions. So just in general around ongoing assessment, we believe it's necessary to help parents appreciate what's going on in an objective way and for clinicians to make informed decisions about treatment. And again, if there are any questions about a variety of measures that you can use in practice, feel free to email me directly. Okay. So the other common process or method is Socratic Style in terms of conveying information. So Socratic Style is teaching by asking instead of explaining. So the parenting intervention, as with many interventions, require people to behave differently. So we have found that when people are given the opportunity to consider for themselves the why and how of changing behaviors, they're more likely to make the commitment to changing behavior. So you see this in health behavior in general. For example, you may have a person who's obese who's been given a lot of feedback from his doctor about why it's important for him to change his behavior, like eating and exercise, but it doesn't seem to work. The person doesn't seem to change their behavior. We see change when a person recognizes for themselves that there is a problem, that they have some control over it, and they need to change their behavior. So Socratic style of conveying information and having discussions can go a long way in terms of helping motivate people for developing self-statements for motivational change. So how do we get people to take a thoughtful approach regarding what they're doing that can lead to commitment to change the short and longer term? So we meaning I and the people that I work with, often ask a lot of questions that can elicit a conversation and self-statement for behavior change. So here you'll see a set of cognitive attributional questions developed by Charles Cunningham at McMaster's University and an integral part of his community education parenting program. So credit goes to him around these Socratic styles of asking questions. So as you can see from these questions, we're trying to elicit from parents the effect of what they are currently doing and what they are trying to do in the short term and long term, and whether these efforts are worth it. If parents can state to themselves the value of a new approach relative to what they are currently doing or not doing, you can obtain higher motivation for behavior change. So I encourage clinicians to get parents to start thinking about what they are doing or what we are asking them to do. Being mindful and reflective is an important aspect of changing behavior. They might not agree with what you're asking of them, and that's okay. But how do we go about having a conversation with parents that can have an impact on how they process what's being asked of them? So throughout the common content that we'll be covering, I always typically use these types of COPE questions specifically, or Socratic questions in general, as a way of having an open discussion about the content, but also for parents to make self-statements about change. Okay. The next common method or process is agenda setting. So setting an agenda is a critical aspect of treatment, both in that it allows you to frame the content that will be covered during a session, but also as a way to model for parents effective ways of structuring their often limited time. This is a skill that I think is important for parents of children with DBDs, as well as those with mental health issues in general, because they often have to interact with professionals like pediatricians and teachers who have a limited amount of time. So I think agenda setting as a way of teaching a skill about prioritizing and articulating needs demonstrating how to effectively collaborate, time management, focusing on the present, and to consider how to problem solve immediate issues. So each session should always have a few minutes devoted to collaborative agenda setting with the therapist who is modeling how to set an agenda in a collaborative and productive way. So one other common method or content. Okay. So learning content. So how do people learn? So we want parents and children to implement strategies and techniques that they agree to utilize. So you can't get someone to do something that they don't agree with. So this goes back to the idea of Socratic questions and making self-statements for commitment for behavior change. So once a parent agrees to do something, you have to impart learning through several methods. So people learn best through utilizing multiple methods, not just hearing and talking, but also seeing and doing. So often parents and clinicians and therapists like to talk, and that's an important part of learning or conveying information. However, in all the work done on common elements of effective treatment, it's the more active parts that are essential, the seeing and doing. Although this is an uncomfortable aspect of treatment for both parents and therapists, this has to be a part of what therapists focus on in session and what they have families do during the week between sessions. So I just wanted to highlight that although we're just talking about this in the context of one slide, I don't want to underemphasize the importance of how we use multiple methods to convey information and for people to learn. Other kinds of interventions also use videotaped vignettes, those sorts of things, as another method to impart information or skills. So that should not be underestimated. And learning also has to do with homework. Now, I know that everyone hates the word homework, so it sort of connotes a bad feeling. So we don't have to call it homework. You can use road work, practice, etc., whatever word you think is appropriate. However, the fact is that the extent to which parents are able to implement agreed upon skills at home repeatedly is going to be directly related to changes in their child and family life. So as an example, a session of 60 minutes represents about 0.006% of a week. So if you expect for what happens during less than 1% of a week to generalize to the rest of the week, you're likely wrong. And one has to plan to try to do homework. The important piece is that homework assignment isn't a one-size-fits-all. What the homework looks like, when, where, and how it will be done are all done collaboratively. Importantly, a small agreed-upon change is always a good start. You want people to experience success in implementing homework, especially very early in the beginning of treatment. In addition, we know that we have to address issues of recall, when and how and where to do homework, and other factors that might get in the way of doing homework. So these should be open, collaborative discussions. In our work, we've used appointment reminders for tasks, used smartphones to program when people have to do what. We've used visual reminders in the home as ways of improving recall and other barriers to doing the homework. Also, going back to the idea of learning, you want to get into the details by discussion, modeling, and role-playing. Effective implementation of the skills at home requires learning through multiple methods, as I mentioned before. So assigning a homework assumes that you've done all those things, that you've talked about it, that you've modeled it, and that you've role-played it. And now you're doing the last step, which is assigning something to be done in quote-unquote the real world. And then an integral part of the common methods or processes are homework reviews. So homework review is important. If you don't put it on the agenda and make sure homework is reviewed, you convey to parents that homework isn't important. And if it's not important to you, then why should it be important to a parent? So with homework, we always want to focus on the positive effort, not the outcomes of homework. In the very beginning, sometimes it's very challenging to change behavior. So we don't want to focus on that as being the thing to focus on in homework review. We want to ensure that parents are making the effort at implementing a particular skill regardless of the outcome. So we always want to remember behavior change is slow. We want to focus on the efforts made and by using Socratic questions to try to initiate a conversation on the benefits of what they are doing for both the short term and long term. So many times you're going to have parents who say they just didn't do the homework for a variety of reasons. They forgot, it was a busy week, whatever the case may be. So this is not a reason for not reviewing homework. Even if a parent didn't do the homework, and again, you can use any term you want to, we'll just stick with homework for now. Even if a parent didn't do the homework, you can discuss with them opportunities where the skills to be implemented as part of homework could have been utilized during the week. So there's always opportunities to implement these skills. Even if you haven't done it, it's important to think back during the week with the parent and say, well, since you didn't do it, I'm sure there are still opportunities where you could have used it. Where do you think those opportunities could be? Additionally, you always want to address what got in the way of doing homework and problem-solve solutions so the same problems don't occur over and over. And whether the parent did or did not do their homework, it's always helpful to discuss, model, and role play with them the details, the when, where, and how. Again, this is just another way of using multiple methods to convey information. And I can't say this enough that although this tends to be the most difficult, uncomfortable aspect of this sort of common set of techniques and processes, it's really essential. Imparting knowledge through multiple methods, including homework, is really critical to ensuring that people really understand what you're trying to focus on in session, and they have the ability and the skills to do it when they're at home. Okay, so now we're going to shift gears, and we're actually doing pretty good on time. We're about halfway through, and we have about 30 minutes left for this webinar. So now we're going to shift gears. So far, we talked about common processes and methods, including ongoing assessment, Socratic Style, including COPE questions, agenda setting, learning through discussions, modeling, role play, homework assignment, and homework review. Now we're going to discuss the common content across these parenting-based interventions. So when you are thinking about the set of common elements, I want you to keep in mind the good supervisor-teacher example. The goal of each of these common content is to help establish a warm, safe, secure context and for supporting and changing behavior. In the terms of the family with the child with a disruptive behavior disorder, it's about creating a positive family environment and utilizing specific skills and techniques to help manage difficult behavior and promote pro-social behavior. So these are not, again, these are not, as I mentioned before, these are not, this is not an exhaustive content, but most commonly used across about 17 different commercial evidence-based parenting interventions that are available. You yourself can come up with different ways of presenting these common content that focus on the underlying principle that's trying to be conveyed. It's important to convey the principle or the strategy in a culturally sensitive manner. So you know your clients better than I do, and people will vary considerably from one site to the next. And so the way we frame things, the language that we use, how we present things, as long as the underlying principle is adhered to, the manner in which it's packaged is probably less important. Always remember that the core processes and methods that we described, the assessment, Socratic Style, learning through discussion, modeling, role play, homework, and agenda setting, are used throughout each of the sessions where common content is discussed. So the common content that we're going to be going through include quality parent, child, or family time, praise, planned ignoring, effective communication, rewards, consequences, incentive systems, and problem solving. So the first is quality parent and family time. So quality parent and family time is an essential aspect of building a solid foundation for the future. So we often hear from families that they love their children, but they just don't like being around them because of their behavior. And this is a vicious cycle. So parents have a difficult time with their children, so it's easy to ignore them. But then they have to address a challenging behavior, which causes more frustration and problems for them. Likewise, children find that perhaps the only times their parent interacts with them is when they did something wrong, and that's never a fun situation. So children also feel that parents are just being negative. So importantly, we need to break this cycle by getting parents and children together under positive circumstances. Now, does this create a lot of sometimes stress for families? Yes, and I'm going to sort of walk through how we use perhaps some of the COPE questions to elicit a conversation with the parent about the benefits of using this approach. But before that, just a couple of important points about quality time between a parent and a child or family. So Uh, One, you should just focus on the child with no other distractions. So it shouldn't really be doing a busy day during the day. Like, for instance, you're getting dinner ready. That's probably not a great time because you have other responsibilities, or you're getting ready to get the kids out the door to school, or bedtime, et cetera. So you want to think about a time where people don't have a lot of other responsibilities or distractions. You want to focus on the positive, not the negatives. It's easy to get into a trap of, oh, this kid did this, and so now I have to attend to it. Not necessarily. If it's a time where there's not a lot going on, you can ignore, and we're going to talk a little bit about planned ignoring in the next slide or the next two slides, but you really want to focus on the positive. This gives a child an opportunity to hear from their parents about the good things that they're doing, which is really important for children. You want to keep it short and focused, so a little goes a long way. So we don't expect parents to drop everything they're doing and spend an hour with their kids just focused on their children, but even a small period can go a long way, especially if it's very different from what the status quo is. So if parents really don't spend a lot of time with their children, or the time that they do spend is really, a battle between a child and a parent, then even 5 minutes can be so different and make a big difference for the child and for the family. And you want to try your best to focus on child-centered interests. So having conversations about school may not be a great thing for a kid who has challenges in school. It just primes a kid to be upset and to perhaps be less engaged. So you want to focus on a short time, positives, and child-centered interests. So as an example, throughout the next couple of slides, in green, I've highlighted a set of very simple sort of homework that can be done. This is very basic, but it is an example. So as an example for this simple homework, you can focus on a 5-minute interaction and agreed upon activity like board games, books, TV, mealtime, where a parent is not really talking to a kid with any particular set of judgments or expectations. And it's really about enjoying being together. So just as an example, with the COPE questions, the kinds of questions I would ask to try and elicit from a parent, is it worth doing this? Is, if you spend 5 minutes with your child, what kind of lesson do you think you communicate to your child when you're spending this time with them? Or what message do you communicate to your child? Is it worth the effort? Is it worth the effort to spend this 5 minutes for the kind of outcomes you think these 5 minutes will be used for? What difference would it make if you spend 5 minutes a day, maybe for 3 days? And then, what kind of difference do you think that would make for your child in terms of your relationship with them? What kind of differences do you think it would make in the short term and the long term? And part of these COPE questions is to elicit a conversation from a parent about why they're doing what we're asking them to do, what the benefits are, what the challenges are, what the message or lessons that are taught. And it's really not only about trying to get them to do something in the short term, but really seeing if we do this for the long term, not just, over the course of the next couple of weeks, but I make this a part of what my family does. What kind of benefit would this approach have in the long term in terms of developing a safe, secure, warm, trusting family environment where a kid grows up and develops? And remember, I'm going to just keep saying this, you always want to think about conveying this information through multiple methods. So discussion, modeling, role-playing, and homework. Okay. So that is quality parent-child time. And the next common content is praise, or specific recognition of efforts. So we all know the adage, if you want to see a behavior happen more often, you have to pay attention to it. So importantly, as I mentioned earlier, it's not just the occurrence of the specific behavior, but effort toward the behavior. So praise, a couple important aspects of specific praise. Praise should be verbal and nonverbal. So praise can be things that you say, but also things that you do, like a pat on the back, a high five, a hug. It should be specific. So it should be stated exactly and not in general terms. So rather than saying, I really like what you did, a more specific labeled praise is, I really like the way you put the dishes into the sink. And that these kinds of praise statements happen immediately after the behavior occurs. So praise that is specific, labeled, that is genuine, and that occurs immediately after the behavior reinforces that behavior. And as I mentioned before, if you want to see a behavior happen more often, you want to pay attention to it. And that's an important, basic kind of skill that we try to get parents to start to use. And again, an example of a simple homework would be picking one behavior that occurs during a specific short period of time and using specific praise. So for example, you can say for a parent, how about we focus on after dinner, we want to focus on a child cleaning up. So I want you to think about the kinds of praise statements you can make during that 5 or 10 minutes, and I want you to really lay it on for this kid. That could be a practice. So even something that is that small, that is that concrete, can help set the foundation for success that can build upon success. So now the next week, maybe the parent can generalize it to more settings or to more kids. This goes back to the idea of small, simple steps in homework that's done successfully can go a long way. Okay, so that's the second common content. And the third is planned ignoring, so letting go of small things. And the purpose here is to minimize unnecessary battles that erode the relationship. And as I just mentioned with specific praise, if you want to see something happen more often, pay attention to it. Well, the same may hold true for negative behaviors. So if a behavior is likely a function of attention seeking, providing that attention to that behavior only makes it happen more often. So planned ignoring is selecting a minor behavior that is attention seeking and planning to ignore it. So when we pick a behavior to use planned ignoring, we want to decide ahead of time what those behaviors are. They have to be minor, so they can't be major problems. You don't want to ignore major problems. They should be attention seeking. They should be things that can be ignored. And when you work with a parent around ignoring, you want to work with them around making sure that they do not provide any attention, verbal or nonverbal, that they really think about how they're going to deal with the behavior. So we often ask parents to think about self-coping statements like, this is only going to last 5 minutes and then it's going to get better. They can even remove themselves from the situation if they feel that the minor behavior is just too irritating. And they also should know when enough is enough. So sometimes behaviors escalate from minor to major, and this simply can't be ignored. If that's the kind of child the parent is working with or has, then it's likely that you probably shouldn't use planned ignoring because it's just going to make the situation worse. So as a simple homework here, you want to pick one behavior to ignore that often happens during a select period of time. You want to ignore this behavior. So for instance, this is particularly useful for younger children. You get a lot of complaining and whining from transitions. So you can have a transition from playtime to dinner time or dinner time to bedtime. And when kids are asked to transition from a preferred to a non-preferred activity, they might do it, but do it begrudgingly, and they might complain a lot. Complaining is attention seeking. And so feeding into it can actually just escalate things to be an argument when it doesn't ever have to get to a point where it needs to be an argument. The one thing I will note about planned ignoring in the research is that this is the one strategy that parents report not using and not liking to use. So just so you know, this is a common element across many of these interventions, but personally and in both research, we have found that out of all the things that parents have attempted, this is the one thing they sort of just don't like doing. Maybe it's not nearly as effective as other aspects of the common content. It may take a lot more effort. Parents just simply may believe that no behavior should be worth ignoring. So again, we are not telling people what to do, but we want to have a discussion with them about the pros and cons and the effort and the benefits of taking a particular approach. If a parent says, this is just simply not going to work for me, we've talked through it, I understand the perspective, it's not worth the effort, then we drop it and we just simply don't use it. Okay. The next is effective communication. So communication is an extremely important skill to model in families. Often families, when dealing with the consequences of DBDs, are exacerbated and rely on ineffective ways of communicating. So working with parents around communication can help clarify expectations that parents have for their children and vice versa, that kids have for their parents. Effective communication relies heavily on what you say and how you say it. So this includes both nonverbal aspects of communication like eye contact, body language, tone of voice, as well as when things are said, so during a time when you have a child's attention, as well as how things are said, framed in positive language that is developmentally appropriate and clear. Always if it's particularly around commands, you always want to provide consequences, both good, like labeled praise, or bad, for following through on commands. Children, especially older youth, should also practice effective communication as a way to get their own needs met. So this is a developmental issue with children, especially as they get older and into adolescence. They have a sense of autonomy, they have a set of needs that they want, but they have a real challenge in communicating it effectively so they can be heard. And so just like these kinds of basic skills are important for parents when they're communicating to their children, it's just as useful for children when they're communicating to their parents. And a simple example of a homework could be practice using effective communication during a 5-minute period a day, paying close attention to nonverbal and verbal aspects of communication. Maybe a time like getting ready for school and bed. And that's a time where parents are giving a lot of instruction to kids, and so parents should be thoughtful and mindful about the way they communicate around those particular times during the day. Okay. So rewards. So parents often have a difficult time with the idea of rewards, and that's understandable. Kids should do what they need to do because they are told and because they're part of a family. So if we flip this back to the idea of a workplace or classroom, we can say that employees or students should just do what they're told because they have to, so there's parallels there. But we know that although this may be true, we know that having some extra help or incentives can support the development of certain particular behaviors. So when we talk about rewards, rewards don't have to be extra things. So automatically when we talk about rewards to parents, they say, no, I don't have the money to do something like that. But really, rewards can be anything that the child enjoys currently, but are being provided non-contingently. So essentially, the child gets to utilize something without having to earn it. But rewards, so that activity or that item can be flipped, so it is now something you have to earn. So parents really like that because, one, it's already available, it's not going to cost them anything. Two, they're giving access to these things anyway, so they know that kids like them and they'll work for them. Kids don't like this strategy, but it's often useful when you're working with families. So in terms of rewards, rewards should be done when specific praise and effective communication is not enough. So it should be a strategy after you've tried other things. It should be meaningful for the child but practical for the family, as I just mentioned before. Rewards should be tied to specific behaviors which are developmentally appropriate, meaning you would want to reward something that, say, you have a 5-year-old and they're learning how let's just say, or a 4-year-old trying to learn how to tie their shoelaces. You wouldn't want just to give reward to when they tie their shoelaces, but really the effort, because these are skills that kids are learning at that age, and rewarding effort there is probably more important than rewarding the outcome. Other aspects of rewards that are important is giving access to the reward only for the behavior. So if you don't earn it, you don't get it. And it's provided upon attaining the desired behavior. So an example of a simple homework here is using identified rewards for a specific behavior that occurs within a specific period of time. So again, this is a simple way of structuring something that you can have concrete for the parent that is very clear, that they can work on, that's not going to be you require them to pay attention for the entire week or across the day. So it increases the likelihood that a parent can actually do this homework and do it successfully. Okay. All right, and now the next common element is consequences. So consequences are a natural part of parenting children. The challenge is for parents of youth with DBDs, consequences tend to be unexpected, disproportionate relative to the behavior. So we want consequences to be clear, expected, and appropriate. In order to effectively use consequences, a parent has to decide what behaviors to focus on. So some could argue here that we should place consequences on all inappropriate behavior. To some extent, I agree, but trying to do that is tiring and unlikely to occur. So it's probably better to focus on what set of consequences for what set of behaviors. So when thinking about behaviors, we should keep in mind that behaviors that require a consequence should be worth the effort, so they're meaningful for the parent. That's something they really do want to change. Not occur at a high frequency. So something that happens all the time but is not very severe, like interrupting, it may be very challenging to consistently apply a consequence for a behavior like that. The behavior should be clearly identified. It should be a behavior, so it shouldn't really be an attitude or a mood. It should be a behavior that a child is exhibiting, and it can be consistently consequated. So it's worth the effort to consistently apply a consequence should a consequence be warranted for a particular behavior. So consequences continued here. Other important things to think about in terms of consequences. You want the punishment to fit the crime. Children become very resentful when they feel they're being punished unfairly. You want to allow for opportunities for children to correct their mistakes. This is an important part of learning. So sometimes parents place a consequence like removing a child for fighting when their cousins are over, but they never get the chance to rejoin their cousins and practice appropriate behavior. So consequences are important, but opportunities to retry and correct mistakes are just as important. Consequences should be done in a consistent manner. And also for parents, it's important to consider verbal and nonverbal behavior when giving consequences, so being serious and firm but not aggressive, keeping themselves calm and collected, as I mentioned before, around planned ignoring, using strategies like self-talk to help keep yourself calm, and you want to avoid punishment and anger. And there are many forms of consequences. There are natural and logical consequences, so if you fool around and you spill your favorite drink, oh well, that's the consequence of your behavior. There's removal of privileges. This works best for older youth and for a certain amount of time. Again, you don't want to create a climate of resent or hostility, so if you take away all the privileges a child had, there may be no reason for a child to feel they need to behave a certain way. What else can you possibly take away when you removed everything? Time out from positive reinforcement is another consequence. This should only be used under circumstances when the behavior is happening because of attention, so the child wants to get someone or something. We often hear parents say they use time out when a child is doing something that is not attention-seeking, like homework. So if you do timeout during homework, that's not a good use of timeout because the child likely doesn't want to do homework anyway. So removing them and putting them in timeout is actually a reward. And here I have an ultimatum. An ultimatum is essentially is used in conjunction with the removal of privileges or timeout as a way of providing a consequence for escalating behavior when a privilege is removed or timeout is provided. So this is a sort of a way to convey to the child that you have to accept this consequence, otherwise the ultimatum will be severe. So for instance, a child says, you say to your child, Johnny, you did this, and now you're not going to be able to play the tablet for the next, the rest of the evening. The child says, oh, child starts getting upset. It looks like they're going to start becoming a little bit disruptive. You say, Johnny, here's the ultimatum. If you don't go to your room, the rest of the weekend you won't be able to, go outside with your friends as planned. So the child here's this ultimatum. The ultimatum is considerably worse than taking the initial sort of punishment, and that's one way of trying to manage escalating behavior as a function of the consequence a child receives. Okay, now we are just about 5 minutes through, so I'm going to try my best to get through this rather quickly. So incentive systems are often used as a way to get specific behaviors, target specific behaviors in a structured way. Incentive systems should be used only after you've tried other kinds of methods like praise, quality time, commands, etc. It should be limited to 1 or 3 behaviors. It's often useful in the short term, but often difficult to implement consistently over the long term. So in terms of incentive systems, this is an incentive system for an older child. As you can see, Here, there are particularly two behaviors that the parent is targeting. These are behaviors. They're very clear and objective. They happen during a specified period of time. It's either a yes or no. And as you can see here, this is a reward menu. We often use menus. So instead of just opportunities to earn one reward, it's based on the number of yeses. So there are 7 days, 2 behaviors, 14 possible yeses. And so if a child is perfect, they can earn something from this level. If a child has done a pretty good job, they can earn something from this level. And a child has done at least 50% or more, they can earn something from this level. And again, these are useful as a way of keeping things interesting. These rewards have to be meaningful to the child, but practical for the family. And they should be changed up every so often. And it's important to get children's input when you're considering different kinds of rewards. Okay, in terms of problem solving, which is the last common content, it's a pretty straightforward process in terms of steps. There are many different manuals that talk about problem solving. I use Chuck Cunningham's PACE system, which is pick a problem. So here you think about the who, what, when, where to get the details of the problem. You consider alternative solutions, which is brainstorming without evaluations. You select the one solution based on the pros and cons of each alternative. You try it out at home, and you evaluate whether it had its intended effect. And so this is often useful when you're thinking about problem solving around community activities like going to the supermarket, to the mall, etc. So this is a kind of conversation that we often have with parents and children so they can collaborate and think about solutions and possible ways of implementing the solution that they had picked. Okay, now in terms of common modifications. So as you can see here, these are the 8, or let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the 8 strategies, younger and older children. So I'm going to talk briefly about how we modify things for the same common content across different age groups. So younger children are preschoolers through 6 or 7. Older children are like 10 or 11 years old, even in some ways even younger adolescents. So quality time should really be play-focused with younger children, activity-focused with older children. Praise tends to be very effective with younger children, but needs to be genuine. Older children can see through behaviors which are not praise, which is not genuine. Planned ignoring works very well with younger children, tends to work less well with older children. I'm going to come back to effective communication in a second. Rewards for younger children can be small and inexpensive. For older children, it's typically activity-based. Incentive systems for younger children often need to focus on daily behavior and daily rewards, where incentive systems for older kids are really around behavioral contracting, having a contract for a certain set of behaviors with a longer-term consequences. And problem solving is really much more helpful when you're including an older youth. Younger children have very limited capacity to help with the problem-solving process. So one important thing that I noted here in red is effective communication. So for effective communication, there needs to be special attention paid to teaching young children social emotional language. So this is for little kids. Given that emotion regulation is a large part of what young children are learning, and disruptive behavior often involves the expression of emotion, helping children to A, identify the emotion they are experiencing, B, accurately label the emotion they are experiencing, and C, accurately express that they are feeling the emotion because of X is really important. So young children just often say they are sad, mad, or happy, and then they have a difficult time understanding what to do about it. So as a parent, you can help, and we always tell parents this. For instance, we teach parents to support children for an example like this. If a child starts crying because they can't figure out a puzzle and they begin to get more upset, a parent can work with a therapist to learn social emotional coaching skills and state something like this to a child. It looks like you're feeling frustrated because you're having a difficult time finishing your puzzle. One thing you can do is ask for help. This is a way to identify and label the emotion accurately, connect the emotion to a trigger, and provide a solution. And these are important skills for young children in general, but particularly for kids with disruptive behavior disorders. For older youth, there's often a poor social information processing that also adds to the complexity to their behaviors. So studies on social information processing have found that youth with disruptive behavior disorders often attribute malintent to others' behaviors, often come up with limited solutions to address others' behaviors and often rely on more aversive or aggressive solutions. So an example is if a child found a sibling with one of their favorite possessions, like say their phone. Children with DBDs will often attribute this to something bad, like for example, my sister tried to steal it from me, versus considering all the potential options. For example, she had moved it because we're all cleaning the apartment today. When they have these negative attributions, they tend to rely on aggressive reactions like, I'm going to punch her. So in order to effectively deal with this, there is often work done in session with older youth to help youth appreciate the range of potential attributions and the range of solutions to situations to implement. And parents are taught to assist and support youth in this way of thinking at home. So these are some common ways that we modify communication with older and younger kids. So ADHD is a common comorbidity with DBDs, and there's been a lot of work done with ADHD and these parenting interventions. What we have found that these interventions do have an impact on ADHD symptoms, do not have an impact on ADHD symptoms, but do have an impact on functional outcomes like family stress and parent-child relationships. So these tend to be very good treatment options for families of youth with comorbid ADHD. Some modifications include psychoeducation regarding ADHD. This is important to gain an appreciation for some of the biological issues that come into play with these kids. Additional modification is a school-home daily report card. This is essentially an incentive system tying school behavior with home rewards. Parenting support for social skills and organizational skills. There's some emerging literature around how parents can support these kinds of important skills, but this is usually done after the common content discussed here and has been completed. And then, of course, the addition of medication. This is really a parent's preference, and we really let the parent decide whether this is going to be an option for them or not. So the last slide here is common modification. So parents with disruptive behavior disorders often have higher rates of a lot of kinds of issues. And there are at least two ways of addressing this. One is you shorten the treatment by focusing on back-end strategies. So we know that parents with considerable psychosocial stressors often have more difficult time engaging in treatment. So in order to maximize outcomes, they have been working on just providing the most effective common content to modify behavior, which includes rewards, consequences, timeout, and incentive systems. So there have been some research showing that this can be as effective as the full dose of these parenting interventions, so just focusing on the back-end content. The other way to deal with this is to provide support to parents to address their own needs. So there has been a good amount of literature on CBT approaches to deal with stress and depression. So I know we had a lot to cover, and we're just about a little bit over time. It's a little past 1 o'clock. So I don't know if we have time to answer any questions, but again, feel free to contact me at anil.chaco@qc.cuny.edu. I'd be happy to have an email conversation or by phone. I hope you enjoyed and learned something from this webinar, and thanks for your time and attention.
Thank you, Anil. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We're sorry we kept you a few minutes extra, and we hope you have a wonderful day. I emailed Dr. Chaco's email around, anil.chaco@qc.cuny.edu if you have any questions for him. Have a wonderful day, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.